FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. This is Kerry Lutz. It is Monday, September 15th. With us is John Rubino of dollarcollapse.com and co-author of the book, The Money Bubble. And John, what's going on?
Hey, Kerry, good to talk to you. Oh, there's a lot going on out there this morning. One interesting thing that may be just a rumor, but if it's not, it's pretty big, is that Russia has actually cut off gas shipments to the Ukraine, which would then normally be shipped to Europe. So Europe is losing a big piece of its gas supply. And that was in the Globe and Mail newspaper this morning. So I'm not seeing it anywhere else, so it doesn't look like it's being disseminated across the blogosphere and mainstream media yet. But if it's true, it's a really big deal for Europe and for the rest of the global economy. So we definitely want to watch that to see if the growing Cold War over the Ukraine actually turns into something more serious, which I still got to doubt it, because why in the world would anybody really escalate over something that's right on Russia's border? But who knows? They're rattling a lot of sabers, and something that is on the level of a gas cutoff to Europe is really economic warfare, and that has the potential to spin out of control. So we want to watch that.
Yeah, and anytime you have governments kind of saber rattling and making threats and sanctions and all that stuff, it can get out of hand, just like 1914, right?
Yeah. Well, you've got so many egos at work and so much pressure on so many people that in the moment, under circumstances like that, people don't always act rationally. And yeah, that's how wars get started, is where one guy who has the power to start something up just loses it and says, all right, look, I don't want to negotiate anymore. Just do something. We need to make a point. And then somebody responds and everything escalates. So hopefully this isn't that. Nobody wants to see an economic war between superpowers, and that's what it would be if it's Europe versus Russia with the U.S. in the mix, and then China and the other BRICS countries on the periphery. And a big part of this is financial. Hopefully it's not military in the end, but the financial side of this is very scary, because already Russia and China and Brazil and India are tired of living under a petrodollar regime, where the U.S. has the ability to sanction their banks and their energy companies and kick them out of the SWIFT system if they want to, the clearinghouse that allows payments to be made between countries, because we have the world's reserve currency. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of power that these guys resent. And they're already taking active steps to trade among themselves without using dollars, using their own currencies. And these guys, in the aggregate, are a very big part of the global economy. So let them set up a system that doesn't require dollars, and all of a sudden the dollar is in big trouble, because it's no longer the world's sole reserve currency. And all these central banks and big trading houses out there that are holding 60% of their reserves in dollars right now won't need that many dollars anymore. They'll need maybe 30 or 40%, and they'll dump the surplus dollars on the open market, or they'll use them to buy U.S. assets and spike prices here, or whatever. It'll cause turmoil, and it'll lessen the ability of the U.S. to affect events in the world, and marginalize us to an extent. So there are huge ramifications geopolitically and financially to what's going on out there right now. So we should all be watching it. And, I hope that people aren't just crazy these days and are willing to escalate something like a spat between Russia and the Ukraine on Russia's border into something that's a global financial crisis. But we're definitely taking steps in that direction around the world. So worth watching. possibly huge ramifications, and yet another reason to be buying gold and silver and selling financial assets around the world.
And you know what else it's going to be good for is Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, you're free of any nation's currency. Because, look, if you're somebody in the West and you see the East setting up a competing currency or system like their own SWIFT, and you say they're going to start fighting it out with their currencies, you say, you know, maybe I need to be using some Bitcoin, keeping my money there, because I don't trust either one of these guys to do the right thing. They might be hurting themselves to hurt the other guy, and you know, none of it bodes well for national currencies, does it?
Yeah, you don't want your bank account to be collateral damage in a currency war, which is what's brewing right now. And Bitcoin exists outside of that system. So you can use Bitcoin with impunity right now, whereas, you know, if you've got rubles or yen or euro or dollars, you know, there are issues that you have to worry about that you don't have to worry about with Bitcoin. So that's an advantage for cryptocurrencies in general and Bitcoin in particular. There are other issues with cryptocurrencies that still have to be worked out. Among them, what kind of regulations are going to be imposed on them by national governments, assuming it's even possible to regulate something that operates just over the internet without any kind of physical presence in the world. But that's going to be discovered over the next few years, and it might not be favorable for cryptocurrencies. And so you don't want to just completely switch your financial life to something that really hasn't been established in all its aspects in the world. So the fact that Bitcoin is advantaged by what's going on in the world is a signal to possibly open a Bitcoin account and figure out how it works and do some of your payments with it, but not a sign that you should move your entire financial life into Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency yet. No, so this is still to be discovered.
I wouldn't say to do that, but I would say you should become familiar with it. You should get a wallet, and you should learn how to conduct transactions. You know, John, just last week, PayPal said that it's going to accept Bitcoin, and that is a huge, huge step in universal acceptance of Bitcoin, because there are millions of people on eBay conducting voluntary transactions that really take place, a lot of them outside the mainstream retail channels. A lot of mainstream retailers are on eBay and on PayPal, but a lot of mom and pops. I mean, I sell stuff myself on there. When it's time for a new computer, I take my old computer, I keep the original box, I clean it up, make it look as good as new, put it up there. I'll generally get, because I have Apple equipment, I'll generally get at least 50% of what I paid for that computer. Even iPhones, when it's time to upgrade, clean up the old one, sell it there, and I'll get as much as 75, 80% of what I paid for that old iPhone, sell it and upgrade. And that's what I do. And let me tell you, the fact that you'll be able to buy anything on eBay for Bitcoin is a huge step in universal acceptance of the digital cryptocurrency. That's not to say you should put your life savings there. Right now, I have about $150 worth of Bitcoin. I'm happy having that amount. You know, I wish I had bought a few thousand when it was trading at 50 cents, but I didn't. So, but I think that any step that either side takes to undermine the standing of either currency, and, you know, the U.S. eventually will retaliate against this emerging currency bloc, and they won't do it in ways that are obvious. You know, they'll strike against the weakest chain, whether it's India or Brazil. You know, it's so easy to undermine Brazil's financial institutions because they have so little credibility as it is. They've been undermined so many times in the past just by Brazil's poor management of their economy that it's kind of like a house of cards. All you got to do is get a little fan right by there and just blow on it, and it falls apart of its own volition, and it sets them back 5 or 10 years, John, you know?
Yeah. And the idea of us doing something like that is just off the charts crazy, to intervene in a major trading partner's economy with the idea of causing turmoil and maybe a crisis is it's despicable to begin with, but also really self-destructive, because these are the kind of things that can easily spin out of control. You don't want to create black swans in a world where there's already 5 or 6 big ones out there waiting to land and disrupt the global financial system. But in the U.S., in particular, in the West in general, we've proven ourselves willing to do stuff like that throughout history. We intervene in the Middle East all the time, where the oil supply is vital to the smooth functioning of the global economy. But we have no problem sending the CIA or whoever in to destabilize countries and cause revolutions without any real sense of what's going to happen afterwards, but we do it over and over again. So the idea that we might do the same thing in the financial realm is not that far-fetched.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And, we're doing it with Russia right now. We're actively trying to mess with their economy.
Yeah. And it's, and they've opened the door to it. And this is
and see, they have some weapons. They can mess with us. They own a lot of dollars, and the BRICS countries together own an awful lot of dollars, more than $1 trillion. And so let them get mad enough at our activities over the last few years, and they have some stuff they can do. And so let them start dumping treasury bonds, for instance, or start expanding their trade in their own currencies. And all of a sudden, we've got a serious problem that we don't have an obvious way of dealing with. Because there are, according to John Williams at shadowstats.com, something like $15 trillion outside the U.S. border that isn't counted in our money supply. So let that amount of money come back. That's about equal to the size of our domestic banking system. So let it come back, because people don't want those dollars anymore, or even an appreciable portion of that $5 trillion or whatever. Then that's going to disrupt the internal economy of the U.S. That's an awful lot of new dollars to deal with. And if it's chasing U.S. assets, that's extremely inflationary, as defined as prices. If we define inflation as rising prices, especially of consumer goods, but also of assets like real estate and farmland, then that's really disruptive from the point of view of us trying to manage, steady growth with low inflation. We won't be able to do that with all that money sloshing around. So that's hanging around over our heads out there now, and it's our fault. We've been abusing our power for all these years, and the rest of the world is finally fed up enough and able to do something about it. So that's one of the many things we have to worry about going forward. And we're only making it worse with our geopolitical blundering of the last few years.
Oh, that's for sure. And no shortage of blundering going around. And, they'd be much better advised to put the system in place. Wait till the economy recovers. The worst time to be doing this is in a global recession, which we have now, or depression, because, even if it's the appearance of stability that the dollar as reserve currency provides, once they take that away, and once there's a competing reserve currency and a competing trading block, it's going to create total chaos in the world. And you think the black swans are flying now? Once they do it, forget it. And it's a bad move on their part to be doing it now. I mean, I'm not against it, because, like you said, the U.S. has really abused its position of trust, and, combine that with the meddling in every country's affairs. And, it deserves to lose its position as reserve currency, not to mention, the economic mismanagement that's gone on in this country. They're totally justified. But, making the conversion now in the midst of what's going on in the world is, talk about unintended consequences. You can forget about it. It's going to be really, really a nightmarish scenario if they do it. And I think that's why China has held off as long as they have, John. They don't want to pull the plug because, the alternatives are really bad.
Yeah. Well, for the trade surplus countries like China, they're building up a lot of dollars still, and they have a huge balance in their foreign exchange reserves of treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities, things like that. But at the same time, they're getting sick of U.S. dominance via the dollar. So they're reaching a point. Somewhere out there is a point where they're sufficiently economically strong to be able to start using their own currency and reap the benefits of their currency becoming, if not a global reserve currency, at least a functioning currency for international trade. But they reap those benefits, and they perceive that those benefits offset the risks of their foreign exchange reserves that are held in dollars going down in value. So they'll take the loss on their dollars in order to make yuan a functioning currency for international trade and to weaken the U.S. So at some point, that becomes a reasonable trade for them. And we don't know where it is, but they're behaving as if they're getting close to that. They're taking risks by bypassing the dollar and kind of dissing the petrodollar by using their own currency. And the U.S. could retaliate against them in various ways for that, but they're taking the risk that it could happen. And they're willing to take that risk. And over time, they're going to be more and more willing because they're just going to get more and more frustrated with the U.S. and they're going to become more and more financially independent unless they have some kind of a crisis, which is possible too. There are so many caveats in any scenario now because there are so many big things that could happen. Anybody who's emerging has huge problems, which might stop them from emerging. Anybody who's stable right now has so many under the surface imbalances that could make them extremely unstable in the future, and you just don't know how it's going to play out. So I think, again, we repeat this when we talk a lot, but the only thing you can really predict with any kind of certainty is rising volatility leading to chaos in the next decade. And what that chaos is going to be is just really hard to predict.
But it's a pretty safe bet.
It is. There are so many imbalances that are continuing to grow that historically those kinds of imbalances have always led to some kind of a crisis. And now we've got a bunch of them. It's not like, the subprime mortgage sector in the U.S. is growing to the point where it's going to pop. We've got so many different things besides just the subprime mortgage sector, which was an easy thing to point to in 2007. That was a pretty easy thing to predict because that was the main bubble. But now we've got trophy real estate around the world, and we've got equities in so many different places, and the bond market is clearly in a bubble right now, and government finances are absolutely insane around the world. And so all kinds of bubbles are bigger and more serious. And derivatives, of course, So there are all kinds of things that are bigger and more serious than the subprime mortgage market was back in 2007. And any of them could spin out of control at any time. And on the other hand, these bubbles might continue to inflate for another 5 years. There's no way to know how this plays out, except that it's going to be chaotic when something bursts, when some bubble just stops and starts to really deflate. And we don't know when it's going to be. We don't know exactly which one it'll be. And we don't know what the impact on the financial markets, what the sequential process of one thing blowing up leading to another thing, which domino will fall first and push the other dominoes down. None of this is knowable, but it's a very safe bet that something's going to blow up and it's going to metastasize and the rest of the system is going to be pulled into a crisis at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, it'll be sooner rather than later. You can pretty much bet on that because, instability is definitely the buzzword of today, and nothing's being done to address it for sure. And in fact, it's getting worse. Especially the derivatives. The derivatives, forget about it.
Isn't that amazing with derivatives that they almost blew up the global financial system 5 short years ago. And instead of scaling back the size of the derivatives books at the big banks, we allowed them to expand their exposure to derivatives going forward. And so now it's bigger and more serious than it was back then, when it almost destroyed the global financial system. You know, you had an insurance company called AIG that most people had never heard of before that, blowing up, and if it wasn't bailed out with several $1 trillion, would have bankrupted Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase and Citigroup. Those three institutions, along with just about everybody else, would have been insolvent the next day. You know, we were a day away from martial law, according to the bankers who were terrifying George W. Bush into going along with these big bailouts. And we're no better now. We're actually in worse shape in a lot of ways. Debt levels are higher at all the major governments, and the economies of the world aren't growing any faster than they were back then. So we aren't throwing off any free cash with which to service our debt. And you know, China is $15 trillion more in debt than it was back then. Europe is plunging into what looks like a depression that has, where there's no way out. You know, even Germany now is not growing like it should, and the periphery is starting to implode. France is missing its deficit targets again and dropping into recession. Yeah, and with that kind of debt, you can't drop into a recession, because then your deficits go through the roof, and your existing debts become harder and harder to service. And at some point, there's no way out other than massive devaluation.
Yeah, and so you can't let the stock market go into a bear market either, can you?
No, because then that throws the wealth effect into reverse. Everybody feels poorer, and they're less willing to spend money, and then the economy shrinks even further. Which, you know, that's a downward spiral that absolutely terrifies the central bankers of the world, because the only way to get out of that is even more extreme debt monetization than we've seen over the last 5 years. And that was an experimental program that stopped the implosion, but at a cost of another, depending on how you define debt, 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 or $50 trillion around the world, which makes things even worse. So,
and you can't raise rates. You can't raise credit standards, because then car sales right now are going, the last time we saw car sales like this were during 2006, when, or 2007, right before the crash. So right now we're seeing an upsurge in car sales because credit scores, credit standards have been loosened up, to where if you can fog a mirror, you can buy a new car. And, rates are so low that they can roll your existing debt from the car that you're underwater in or on to a new car. So, hey, everything's fine. Don't worry about a thing. Just go buy a new car. And so we have the illusion of prosperity, and, don't worry about it, right?
Yeah, basically. We basically just came up with some new subprime lending strategies.
Sub. I never heard sub before. I mean, how much lower can you go? I mean, you can loan to dead people then.
Yeah.
That's the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, and anything is theoretically possible that you can get away with, that people will let you do. And people seem to be infinitely gullible when it comes to debt. If a banker or a credit card company tells you you're creditworthy, even if you don't have a job or any free cash or anything like that, you seem to believe them, and you take the loan. Yeah. That seems to be how it works for most people. And so, you you don't have a very good job, but we'll sell you this new $40,000 car on, it's 8% interest for 7 years, and you think
us.
That's basically no money down, drive away, just sign the papers, and so thereafter your life is kind of a nightmare, because you've got these big payments on a car that is now depreciating rapidly. Same thing with student debt. So those are our two subprime areas that we're really aggressively lending money into now, is car loans and still student loans, where kids are graduating at the age of 22 with $40,000 or $50,000 of debt and not finding any jobs in their field. So they're now barista at at a coffee place, and they're not making nearly enough to pay off their student loans, so they get forbearance, which means the interest continues to accrue, even though they don't have to make payments, and so their debts just mount throughout their lifetimes. And more kids are seeing that happen to them. So that basically means that they spent money on college now, and they can't spend money on anything else in the future. So you took future growth, moved it to the present, and created the illusion of actual GDP increases in the last few years. But that's at the cost of slower growth in the future. So, it goes on and on. We're building up all these imbalances that we don't know how to get out of. And eventually, the only solution is going to be to devalue all the major currencies really aggressively. So we're going to get a burst of inflation at some point when the euro and the yen and the dollar become worth half what they were worth the week before. And that means, and according to Jim Rickards, and I like this scenario, they'll all devalue against gold and go back to some kind of a sound money regime based on gold, but with gold at $10,000 an ounce. So that means milk is $9 a gallon, and bread is $12 a loaf, and gasoline is, depending on the state that you're in, $15 or so a gallon, and it goes on like that. You'll see your cost of living go through the roof and your savings be diminished, but what currency you have left will be solid. It'll hold its value going forward, at least for a while.
Right.
And for somebody that owns a lot of gold and silver and farmland and other hard assets, that's going to be fine, because those things will go up in value as the currency goes down. For somebody who has a bank account denominated in dollars, and they've been getting 0.05% on that for the last 3 years, all of a sudden they get negative 50% that year.
Going to be an unhappy day for sure.
Yeah,
and
for savers.
On that note, we got to go. So you find John at dollarcollapse.com. Make sure you check out his book, and basically go over to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Check out our site. We've got hundreds of articles every week from hundreds of different websites. Our webmaster, Stefan, personally chooses each article that gives you useful information or that he deems important, and he's right up there with the thought leaders. He gets what's important, what you need. So financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Sign up for a newsletter. Also, we got a webinar coming up on September 24th at 9 p.m. There's a link up on the site in the left-hand corner. Sign up for that. It's free. Going to be real interesting. We got Greg Manarino, who's going to be showing you some things that I think you'll find real helpful. And John, we will talk to you next week.
Thanks, Kerry. Talk to you next week.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.